Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Hi, I'm Abram Becker. I'm Interim Director of Discovery to Product, or D2P, and I'm super excited that you're here today to join our panel on demystifying the FDA regulatory path and profession for medical devices and software. We've got a great panel here today. But first, I'd like to start out by acknowledging and pointing out that this is part of UW-Madison's Innovate Week. We kicked this off yesterday with a great event. The Isthmus Project had some office hours, and then we had an event at the Wisconsin Energy Institute. We've got this event today, others throughout the week, including tonight over at WID. We've got a showing of Mao, a great life focused design firm that's going to be a great event. We've also got events throughout the rest of the week that I'd encourage you to check out. And then today, in addition to D2P, today's event is brought to you by Forward Biolabs as well as the Isthmus Project. We've got Danya Champion from the Isthmus Project here today, and going to have her say a word or two.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm Danya Champion, Program Manager with the Isthmus Project, and we take healthcare solutions, ideas for healthcare solutions from within the system, UW, from concept to commercialization. So we can provide guidance and mentorship, and then if an idea is long, kind of in the process of becoming that next day in clinic, then we can help with investment funds too. So looking forward to chatting with some of you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I should have, for those of you that don't know, D2P, or Discovery to Product, we're an office that sits within the Office of the Vice Chancellor of Research and Graduate Education here on campus. We were founded as a partnership between UW-Madison and WARF, or the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. We're a resource that helps faculty, staff, students that have ideas, inventions, technologies that they're looking to translate, potentially commercialize, get out into the world somehow to live the Wisconsin idea, so that we can take the knowledge, discoveries being created here on campus, and positively impact the people in the state of Wisconsin, the nation, and the world. And with that, would like to introduce Mike Parch, who is representing WARF here today, as well as we talk a little bit about Forward Biolabs, who WARF helps sponsor as well.
Hi everyone, Mike Parch. I'm with WARF, the Chief Venture Officer there. I'm also on the board of Forward Biolabs. Forward Biolabs is a shared lab facility over in Research Park, University Research Park, and it is a tremendous boost to the burgeoning biotech community here in Madison, Wisconsin. What it exactly is a facility that provides individual benches and cubes and office space for startup companies with shared lab facilities, cold rooms, equipment, centrifuges, all of that stuff. So you don't have to go out and create that yourself from the get-go. I helped start my first biotech company as an undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania. I remember when we spun out of the campus, it took a year for us to build out a facility, get qualified as a customer of many of the vendors. All of that's taken care of for you at Forward Biolabs. You can actually get in and get started the first day that your lease begins on your bench. You can start running startups. So there's a really, really tremendous benefit to the startup community here, allowing startups to hit the ground running without having to make a huge investment in infrastructure. So, speaking of Forward Biolabs, here's Jessica Martin, really.
It is really good to be here. Looking forward to chatting more. Nothing that being put on the spot. Forward Biolabs is a co-working lab for life sciences companies, much like you are probably thinking about starting and learning about here today. So we've got a lab full of tons of equipment, lots of operational systems and infrastructure behind it, all set up to help early stage startups get started faster and more efficient.
Thanks. Excellent. Thank you so much. And With that, I'll turn it over to Amy, who's going to take us through the rest of our agenda. Our speakers are going to chat a little bit, and then Amy will moderate the rest of the session. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Excellent. So I'm really thrilled that you guys all are here. We have a great diverse audience, people from industry. We have graduate students, postdocs, undergrads, and faculty, as well as staff. So the audience is just as rich with experience and ideas as are our panelists who are regulatory professionals. And as a background, Tricia and I met outside of our professional lives, and we both came to the same understanding that we thought that the university had an opportunity to really marry knowledge and education about both the regulatory profession to students, but also to innovators who we know in the medical device space need to have regulatory help and consult. And so we here at D2P, as well as the ISMIS project, right, one of the first steps in thinking about a new innovative medical device, software as a medical device, any of those in that category, is really understanding where you sit in the regulatory space. That's going to help you figure out what your pathway to market is. And so with Tricia's help, we've developed this great panel for industry experts who can share both their professional experience as to how to become a regulatory professional, but also answer questions about the state of the art on how people are getting devices through the FDA. And so we're going to start with the four panelists. They're going to introduce themselves and their background, but they're each going to take a little portion of the regulatory professional space. So they'll take turns speaking and sharing some information up here at the podium. And then we're going to have the last 45 minutes for a moderated question and answer period. So this is where I think it really can be exciting. Your questions can be asked of not only our regulatory experts here, but I understand there are other regulatory professionals in our audience who can also speak and answer questions. So we want to make sure that the questions we ask can benefit everybody. So make sure they're sort of at a general high level. But, if it gets specific into, a topic like AI, we want to dig deep there. The panelists have requested ask questions at the end. So save your questions for the question and answer period. And with that, I'm going to hand over the microphone, proverbially, to our first speaker. Mic drop. Come on around this side here.
Is this the remote?
Yes. And the mic will only work if you're close.
Okay. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I am Carol Lindsay. I am the sorry, can you hear me? Okay, I'm Carol Lindsay. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Program Manager at Promega Corporation here in Madison. We deal mostly with in vitro diagnostics. So I'm going to give you just an overview and introduction on regulatory affairs. So I know for regulatory affairs professionals who are in the audience, you know all this stuff. But for people who are thinking about getting into regulatory or want to know what it is, hopefully you'll find the information useful. So what is regulatory affairs? So regulatory affairs is a profession, and the whole purpose of it is to ensure compliance of products with the regulations for wherever you want to sell them, your products into. It covers the entire product life cycle. So you're starting out with your product development all the way through to the end of that product's life when it is being obsoleted and taken off the market. And the regulatory affairs professionals are involved with that entire process. To start with product development, you're looking at what do I need to know when I'm making my product so that my design is going to be compliant for whichever markets I want to place my product into. So your regulatory affairs people are bringing in here's the requirements for your different markets, and this is what we need to consider in the design, so we don't get to the end and find we missed something and we can't get the product approved. Also looking at strategy, so based on where you want to put your product, what is the strategy for getting that to market? What will it need to do to get to approval? What things will you have to cover? Sometimes it's, there's an order in which you might want to do them in. Maybe you get your FDA approval first, and then that helps you get into other markets. So it's looking at that, developing a strategy so it drives your entire process. Manufacturing, we're just involved in are we making sure that we're covering everything in that process, we're meeting any requirements, and that product will be safe and effective. Once you have your finished product and you're taking that through to get your approval, you're looking at what are the regulations that we need to get to that approval, and do the regulatory authorities agree that your product is safe for whatever its intended use is, and they'll give you that approval. So for medical products, that's typically a submission, and there's a lot of technical documentation that needs to be included in that submission, and it's everything from your product design, your manufacturing information, any safety testing reports, your clinical information, your analytical information, your product labeling, which would include your instructions for use, and all of that has to be compiled, and then it's submitted to the different authorities who will then review it and decide, is this sufficient to approve this product, have they made a case for it, and is this appropriate for our market. Once that product is on the market, you're not done. So there's a post-market things that you have to do. You have to do your post-market surveillance. So you have to monitor your product. Is it working the way I expect it to? Are there things that I didn't expect to happen that are happening? Is there something, maybe someone got hurt by something in their product, and now I have to go look at what was that, why did it happen? You probably have to report that to the regulatory authorities. You may have to do annual reporting or different things that feed into that. So this I'm not going to go into in any detail, but it's just to give you an idea. So regulatory affairs role interacts with a lot of different groups across the organisation. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see a lot of different groups both within and outside the organisation that the regulatory affairs people will be interacting with, both bringing information to informed decision making, and then also taking the outputs and turning that into a submission that will go to your regulatory authority. And then on the right, you'll see they're interacting with the regulatory authority. There's questions and things coming from that, they're bringing it back to the organisation, and then it's a reiterative process until you get your approvals. Once your product's approved, you've got that annual reporting perhaps, you've got if there's an adverse event, that kind of reporting. If you're making a change to your product, you may need pre-approval. So again, there's this iterative process to get through that. Just some key skills that the regulatory person needs. First of all, you have to be able to quickly digest and understand a lot of information. You're dealing with complex products. You don't need to be a technical expert, but you need to be able to explain the product to someone else. Regulations change. They change a lot. There's new regulations come out, and you have to be able to keep up with that and be able to understand it. You have to have good communication skills. You have to be able to understand what that regulation is and then translate it in a way that others in your organisation can understand. And that could be different at a senior management level. That may be a very high overview. This is what changed. This is how it impacts our organisation. For a design team, it may be at a much more in detail and technical level because there may be new technical requirements for the product. For the regulators, you have to be able to tell the story of the product. Why is this a safe product? Why is this an effective product? Why is this needed for patients? You have to be able to explain it and essentially sell it to them that this is a product that should be approved and put on market. Need good attention to detail. Your submission has to be accurate. You have to avoid any inconsistencies because the regulators will find every single one of those when they're reviewing it. So you have to be very careful of what you're putting in those submissions. And you have to have a lot of learning. Regulatory people are lifelong learners. There's new things coming all the time. So you have to very quickly switch your attention, and maybe it's like, oh, what about regulations for country X? And you have to go learn about that. So you have to really enjoy doing that. And as I mentioned, that regulations change frequently. So just give you a little bit about the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, or RAPS. This is our professional organisation for dealing with regulatory affairs professionals that deal with healthcare products. So you'll see there's like 5 strategic priorities that RAPS has. I'm not going to get into all of them, but essentially they are responsible for the professional certification of regulatory affairs professionals, which is the Regulatory Affairs Certification, or RAC, and that's an exam-based certification that you then maintain through continuing education. They provide educational materials, they do certificate courses, they do webinars, they also provide books, white papers, and all that kind of thing too. They have a regular newsletter that goes out on regulatory affairs topics to keep people up to date. And then they also, it's a good way if you're looking for jobs to go in and see what they have. And then finally, I just want to mention our local resources. So we have a Wisconsin chapter for RAPS. This is what we are involved with. It is managed by local Wisconsin regulatory professionals, and we provide local educational networking opportunities. We do about 3 to 4 events per year. Some are like webinars and online materials. Other ones that just started this year, we've been able to get back to in-person events like this. So that's what we do. We're all here. If anyone wants more information, please come and speak to us. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Tricia.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? My name is Tricia Mercier. I'm the head of regulatory for a division of Philips. Thank you. So I'm going to discuss some of the regulatory pathways. We're going to keep this kind of general to all medical devices right now, and then we'll dive into software and AI a little bit more when Tracey speaks. So we focus primarily on the US for this presentation. And the regulatory pathway in the US is determined by the classification of your device. The US is a predicate-based system, which means that you want to find a device with a similar intended use and technological characteristics to the device that you want to put on the market. The way that you do this is by looking through a database of product codes that describe the types of products that have been previously cleared by the FDA. And that's for sort of the lower risk devices. If you're a higher risk device, then you would go through the pre-market approval pathway, which is a little bit of a different strategy. But most of the devices in the US come into the class 1 or class 2 categories. And to get to which classification your product would be, you look through this database that FDA maintains, and you would try to find a device most similar to yours. The different classifications, class 1 is the lowest risk, class 3 is the highest risk, and this talks through a little bit of the controls that FDA has deemed appropriate for the regulation of each type of product. Class 1 devices, they may not always be 510K exempt, but typically that's a general controls device, which means you just need to comply with the requirements of a quality system, and then you would place the product on the market just with listing it in the FDA's database and basically telling them that you're doing that. For class 2, those are general controls, which again is compliance with that QMS, that quality management system, plus special controls, which is a 510K with any additional controls that are appropriate for that device type. Those are usually defined and explained within the product code that FDA publishes online. And for class 3, they say general controls plus a pre-market approval. So the general controls, again, is the quality management system. Pre-market approval is an application that you submit. That's the only type of product that FDA formally approves, and it has a higher bar because it is a higher risk device. So these are the types of devices that, a lot of implantables fall into this space, different things like that. So depending on the nature of the risk of your device, you have a different regulatory pathway and submission pathway to get to be placed on the market in the US. So yeah, again, the class to which your device is assigned determines the type of pre-market submission and application required for FDA to authorize your product to be placed on the market. So I did put a link in here, but this is a link to FDA's database, so it's 21 CFR 860, and if you look under there, they classify the devices by kind of subject area. And from there, you can determine what device type is most appropriate for your device to fit into, which category or classification is most appropriate for your device. Based on that, you will also select a predicate, which is a device that you will be comparing your device to in your submission to show that your device has at least equivalent performance characteristics and safety profile. If there's not a classification within the FDA's database that seems to describe the device that you are working on, if there's not an option, you can submit a 513G request, which does have a fee associated with it, and then the FDA will provide some insight as to what they think the classification should be. Those are honestly not the most, at least right now, they're not the most reliable. There's not as much of a time metric. They're supposed to respond within 60 days, but if they don't, it's harder to get a response from them on those. So those are a little bit hit or miss. If you know that your device is a high-risk device, you default to class 3. So you would automatically submit a pre-market approval, which is that higher path is a more expensive submission. More data is required, manufacturing data is required. There's just a higher bar for those products. So you default into class 3. If you think that you should be a class 2 device, then you would submit essentially a de novo, which is it creates it's a pathway that's similar to 510K, but it actually creates the product code and the special controls that are appropriate for that. So we'll get into that a little bit more. If you can find a device, if you find a classification with a similar intended use or description as to what you're working with, you would identify both the regulation number, so there's usually a something within the CFR that describes exactly what the device is intended to do, and a product code, which is a 3-letter code that correlates to that regulation number. And the product code is where you'll find more information on the types of testing standards that are required, whether you need 510K, all of that kind of information. So that database actually gives you quite a bit of information about what you need to do to get to market. Whether you qualify for a third-party review or if you go straight to the FDA, stuff like that. And again, there's that kind of put the classifications in here just for reference. And then if you don't, you would have to go through a de novo or through a class 3 PMA submission if there's not a product code that describes your product. This is just an example of the product code information that you would find on FDA's website. So it tells you, again, the device name, the definition, so it describes a little bit about what this code is intended to encompass. And it also includes the submission type, so this is a class 2 device, so the device class down here is class 2, submission type is a 510K, it gives you that regulation number, that's the 21 CFR 870.2790. There's a total product lifecycle product code report that you can review just for your information. And it also will give you, so on the bottom it says third-party review, it's not third-party eligible, that means you have to submit it to the FDA to have them review the submission. Some other information that you sometimes see in here are standards or guidance documents that would be applicable to that product code. So those are things that you'll want to reference when you're writing your submission and build into your design process to make sure that you comply with the applicable requirements. All right. Tracey?
Okay, so I'm Tracey Fox, and I'm a rule follower, so I'm going to stand in front of the black mic like I was told to do. Okay, so, but then the slides, I killed the slides. How about that? All right, so this is the interactive portion. Okay, the interactive portion of the presentation. When I say medical device, what do you think of? Yellow, what medical device do you think of?
Tongue depressor.
Tongue depressor, good one. Class 1. Pacemaker, good one. Class 3, yeah. Anything else? What else?
MRI.
MRI, lovely, good job. Okay, so those are all great examples, and they are all hardware devices. No one said a software application, because when you think of a medical device, you think of something tangible, and often people wonder, how can software be a medical device? In fact, they'd like to believe software is not a medical device, because that would be a lot easier. So this is FDA's definition of a medical device. So, and it starts out with an instrument, an apparatus, right? We're thinking physical things. But it's anything that can be intended for use in diagnosis of disease or other conditions, cure, mitigation, treatment, prevention of disease. And that's not a drug, which is the last statement. So that's what a device is. And so when we think of a software application, we can think of something, even though it's just a bunch of code, the output of that code can help you diagnose a disease, right? It can help you do treatment planning for a disease. So that software on its own can be a medical device all on its own. And because we would like to believe software is not a medical device, we often say things like, well, it just helps the physician. It's clinical decision support for the physician. And CDS has kind of become a bad word, clinical decision support, because people would like to put all of CDS in that category of not a device, because it's easier. It doesn't have all the overhead that Tricia was talking about with submissions. But actually, CDS can fall in all three buckets I have up here. So it can be a device, it can be not a device, and it can fall into a gray zone called enforcement discretion, where it is a device, but FDA is not going to actively enforce the regulations around devices. So an example that I have up here is a Fitbit. So everyone knows what a Fitbit is. There's software in that Fitbit that helps track your steps when you're exercising. And when it's just you using that for exercise, not a device. Simple. But if I take that Fitbit and I track irregular heartbeat rhythms, or AFib, now I fall into that category that Tricia just had up on the screen, that classification for an electronic device that tracks heartbeat. And so now that Fitbit is a device. If I take that Fitbit again, and now I'm prompting a pre-diabetic patient to exercise. It's kind of a gray zone, right? It's still exercise, but I'm preventing a disease. So I kind of fall in that middle space. And in that middle space, FDA is saying you should still have a quality management system in place. You're doing something in that healthcare space to help patients, but we're not going to ask you to submit a submission at this time. We're going to watch for safety issues and follow up if needed. However, if it's solidly a device, you have no choice but to do one of those submission paths. So FDA has created it's kind of a decision tree that you can walk through, and this is being recorded, but it's not my favorite. I actually think there's some bias in this decision tree. Because it depends on who answers the questions as to where it'll lead you. And it's going to lead you into one of three paths. It's going to say not a device, likely not a device, likely under enforcement discretion, or likely a device. So it's going to lead you to those. It's a nice thing to start out with if you have an idea and you want to see where it might fall. But I would say if you actually want to commercialize it, get some help from a regulatory professional to walk you through that decision tree. So that's up there and that's available to you. And then just a little commercial on AI because we have such a short period of time here. But the FDA is just getting into this space in regulation. So there's not quite a lot out there yet. There's a white paper out there that you can read that's pretty good, that they're talking about the framework they want to put in place. There's also international regulators have gotten together and looked at what are good machine learning practices for developing AI. And there's 10 steps there. And if you go on the FDA's website, you can get the expanded bullets. These are just the titles of each of those bullets. But the first one talks about using multidisciplinary expertise throughout the total product life cycle. I'll expand on that and say what FDA doesn't want you to do is it doesn't want you to sit in a room by yourself with a universe of data and say, what trends can I find in here? What can I make this algorithm do? That is not at all what they want you to do. They want you to start with good software engineering, start with your user's needs. What does your user need? And then how can you design something to meet that need? They want you to make sure your data is representative of the intended patient population. So maybe not that universe of data you already have. You may have to collect new data that's representative of what you will need to develop that algorithm. They want you to have good data hygiene. Keep your training data separate from your testing data. Make sure that the people who are developing don't have access to that testing data. Use different people to do the testing than did the training. Because if you just use your training data to test it, you're going to get great results because it's already seen that. So it's just going to spit that back out. You want to make sure you have a good gold standard for your reference standard, and you have good documented ways of getting that gold standard or that reference standard. And you want to make sure that your data reflects the intended use of the device. And we should have started with intended use of the device because that's really what puts you in that definition of if you're a device or you're not. What is the intended use of the algorithm? You want to make sure you've thought about who's going to use your algorithm and how are they going to interface with it. Who is the human that's interfacing with it, and how can you design for human factors? You want to make sure that your testing is done during clinically relevant conditions. So maybe simulated conditions work, maybe they don't. It really depends on that intended use. And you want to give your users very transparent information in the user's guide that says how this algorithm has been developed, what it can do and what it cannot do, what data sets it has seen and what data sets it hasn't seen, so that they're able to make decisions with it with that in mind. And then you have to think about monitoring that algorithm over time. So is it going to be a continuous learning algorithm or is it going to be a locked algorithm? And what kind of retraining or when would you need to retrain? And I'll tell you this, if you're thinking continuous learning algorithm, none have been cleared or approved by the FDA at this time. So tread lightly. Okay. All right, so that was a little commercial on software and AI, and now just briefly on a career in regulatory affairs. So Carol gave a very good overview of what regulatory affairs is. I'm going to expand on that a little bit. I had to put together this slide for my new role at Olympus anyway, so I thought I'd just throw it in here. But really the point of it is when I started out in engineering, I had no idea what this field was. And even though it shows my career as a straight line, no one's career is a straight line, right? It goes up, down, over, and around. I started out in automotive and reliability engineering, and then I ended up putting in a quality standard, which led me to putting in a quality standard at GE Healthcare for imaging devices. And then I found out there's actually a degree in regulatory science. Isn't that exciting? So I was able to get a master's in it. There are PhD programs as well, but only a few. There's only a handful of them. And then I moved on. In the last few years, I've been really focusing in the software space. And now I'm back again at both hardware and software products. So that it's just kind of an example. But what I really wanted to talk about is, as was brought up, RAPS has a competency framework around what does it take to be a regulatory affairs professional. And we've been talking about devices, and Carol does IVDs. But actually, the majority of regulatory affairs professionals are in the pharmaceutical space. There's a lot more of them that are in there developing pharmaceuticals. There's also some in the food space. There's some biologics, cosmetics, and vets products, but not as many because there aren't as many of those products out there. And then, exciting new field for regulatory affairs, the cannabis field. So FDA is already working on regulations in this space. So this will be a growing space for regulatory affairs. So we've talked about industry, but there are also consultants. So Robin's going to talk about being a consultant next. You can also work as a regulator, such as at the FDA in government. And then, of course, academia here supporting some of the innovation that you're working on. So that's the brief commercial on that. All right, thank you.
Hello, I'm Robin Martin. I'm a co-founder of Kinetic Compliance Solutions, and I am a regulatory affairs consultant, so full disclosure. So when you talk about, startup space, small business, and even medium and large size business, there are times where you may or may not need to hire a consultant. And when you look at what a consultant should bring to your organization, you want to look for expertise that your internal team doesn't have. You want to look at short-term staffing gaps that may need to be filled so that you don't have a business disruption, or a new regulation, something new is coming, a new project, and you need some surge support, right? There are a lot of areas where consultants can be particularly helpful in the medical device space, in particular cybersecurity, standards testing, human factors testing or usability engineering, clinical trial management. It's areas that maybe you as a company haven't built out a team for, that you're going to want to go external and get some support, because it's going to be costly if you have to go back and redo things. You need to outsource where it will take your internal resources away from priority, basically, right? And frankly, there's certain roles that are not going to be full-time as you start out. It's going to be, we've got one project in this area, we've got one device, and we need somebody to come and run one study. And maybe you don't need a full-time person continuously on staff. But I do want to note that if you are running a startup or a small company, quality, regulatory, and compliance need to be considered early and resourced appropriately. So when I see, what? Can you not hear me? Oh, you can hear me. Oh, okay. Yes. When I see a company that's small or medium size and they don't have a full-time quality person or regulatory person on staff, it's alarming to me. You need that person full-time with you from the start to make sure you're doing things correctly, or it's going to be very costly, right? Some considerations in hiring consultants. Who should you hire? You want to look for someone who has expertise with your technology or something very close. Don't bring in a pharmaceutical person to run a medical device submission and vice versa. They're different, and you're paying someone to learn that space instead of paying somebody who already has the expertise, right? Someone working with software as a medical device may not be a good fit moving into implants. They're different. There's different requirements. And they may not know FDA's current expectations. So some questions you might want to ask when you're talking about a regulatory consultant are what FDA branches have you worked with? How many submissions have you done? What type of submissions? And how many were actually successful? Help us understand interactions outside of submissions you've had with FDA, because there are a lot of opportunities for companies and people to interact with the FDA. And were any of your submissions unsuccessful? Tell me why and what you learned from those, right? There's numerous ways to find consultants. Referrals probably are a great one. The Regulatory Affairs Professional Society lists them. And the other thing I thought of after I prepared these slides was, to Trisha's point earlier on FDA databases, there are FDA databases with all the 510K and PMA clearances and approvals out there. And you can go look and see who's working in the ECG space, who's working in the implantable space as a consultant, and look up that person, right? And in terms of, when you start looking at building a business out, building in the medical device or med tech area, you really want to look at your regulatory strategy up front. That's something that a consultant can help with, or if you have someone internal, they can help you as well. But your leadership team is going to ask you, how long is this going to take, right? And you want to be able to answer that question accurately. And it's typical that device development can take 9 to 12 months, and FDA submission can take anywhere from 3 to 12 months. So as a startup or a small company, you may think about, how can we start creating a revenue stream before becoming a full-blown medical device? Because you cannot sell a device without FDA clearance or approval if it's regulated. So can you take a non-medical device app or service to market first? Take my Fitbit, take it out, start selling Fitbits, and add the ECG functionality later, right? If you have a de novo product, which is a higher regulatory bar than a 510K product, could you start with a version that has less functionality less claims or slightly different intended use, where you could get a 510K going first and then layer on the functionality later that requires a de novo submission. You need to look at what kind of claims you want to make. If you're making a full-blown, this device takes away all physician decisions and makes a diagnosis, the regulator is going to look at that very differently than we present some information from the physician for a physician to look at, and then they can make a decision. So you need to look at what's your marketing team want to say, and maybe bring it back in a little bit to shorten timelines sometimes. Other things you can do in terms of strategy, can you partner with a company that has what you need, or vice versa? Maybe somebody out there is very interested in your technology and you can leverage your IP and license that, versus I've got a 3-person business trying to take this thing through the FDA and turn myself into a full-blown biotech company, right? For the unknowns in your development, can you meet with FDA and discuss them? So if you've got a question, FDA has tools where you can meet with them and start talking through different questions and different issues that you're coming across. And are there markets outside the US that the company wants to pursue? The earlier you can identify that and start to think about it, the better off you are, because there are requirements that can be built in early and addressed earlier if you want to go to multiple markets versus just focusing on the US. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You guys can have the mics, because this is now the interactive portion where we get to ask this panelist as well as the audience various questions. And so I'll kick off with the first question, and then feel free to raise your hand, and we'll bring the mic over so that we can get this recorded for the answers. But in our audience, I know we have engineers who've developed medical device prototypes. They're in academia. And you talked about general controls and a quality management system, which most engineering academic labs probably don't have. Can you share what that might look like to get ready to move off campus? What are some good practices that an engineering group could do? And what does maybe a QMS look like at the early stages?
All right, so a quality management system, there's actually 2 references that I would point you to first. 21 CFR 820 has a good description of what the FDA's expectations are for a quality management system. And there's a standard, ISO 13485, the latest version right now is 2016, that also defines some good quality management tools and suggestions for how things should be done, what processes you need to have, how you should be doing things, and things you need to consider in the design and development of your process. They're very high level. That's not going to tell you exactly what you need to do. In some cases, you can buy a QMS from different companies. Have you seen that work ever?
I haven't seen many companies do it where you can just go with it.
Yeah.
Like
Usually there's still quite a bit of customization that's required from those. So I would say, again, if you're talking to a regulatory or a quality person, they can probably help you identify what may be helpful from something like that, and where you may be better off just using the processes that you proceduralizing the processes that you're already using. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
What I've seen in early R&D, so before you even get into that design, that would be helpful, I think, is just keeping very detailed records. Write down more than you think you need to, because you really want to translate that eventually into user needs, requirements, how you tested it to meet those requirements, all of that. And typically what happens is early on, you're not recording enough. So then when you go into the formal quality system, you have to redo everything. So that's my suggestion, is document more than you think you need early on.
And I was just going to say again that from a regulatory perspective, the most important thing is your intended use. So make sure that you really understand and you're designing to an intended use consistently, whether it's you're going to do something for 3 days versus 30 days, or there's any number of variables that you can change and move around in the development process, and that's fine, just as long as it's clear what you're tracking to, and if you can really, really hone in on an intended use, that will help you the rest of the process. Does that answer the question?
Very, very well.
Right.
It sounds like great documentation. Continue the documentation that you might have in your lab, and then you can transport it into a QMS system that you develop at the company. A QMS software subscription may not be the best first start because there's a lot of customization. Questions from the audience, and as a side note, we'll share the slide deck for all the attendees, so that you have all that information. Questions from the audience? And while you think, I'll throw out another question. It seems like this is both an art and a science, right? With the Fitbit, there's a strategy, and you have to figure out where you want to go with your business. And so when people work with you, whether it's in your big industry and you're thinking about bringing a new product to market, or at the startup level, when do they engage the regulatory experts? I heard marketing as well, right? Your indications for use are really a prescription for how your marketing can talk about it. Share with me maybe a story about how you thought about different ways of bringing the same device to market in different ways.
Okay, well, I can't take credit that I thought of this, but the first company that I worked for had a product that they intended to go to market with as an aesthetic for nasolabial fold filling, basically filling in wrinkles on your face, right? But that was a PMA, so that's a long game, right? So they took that same exact product, same formulation, and they got clearance for an indication where you could use it after a stroke, because there was a predicate. So they would fill behind the vocal cords after a patient had a stroke and put filler in there, so the person's vocal cords would start to close again and they would be able to speak after a stroke. And there was a predicate for that, but not for the application for wrinkle filling, of all things. And they did a couple other 510Ks as well, so that they were able to start generating revenue and show investors, hey, we know how to do this. We know how to get through the FDA. Like, this is our end game. But it was the same product.
Great example. Questions? Raise your hand. I'll come by with the mic.
I have a question
Let me get the
regarding.
mic.
Well, I don't know if I need it.
We're recording.
Okay. When does the stringent documentation requirements kick in the development process, when you have concept generation and you're just starting early prototypes, not sure where it's going to go, or do you have to start declaring intended use and flipping the switch to full documentation? I mean, is there a difference between concept development, prototyping, and development or founding?
You want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, right in the beginning when you're just playing, probably not quite as important, but when you start to refine that concept down to, okay, this might be viable, I think this is the one I'm going to take forward, that's where it kicks in.
So if you declare the intended use,
You can do that.
change that?
Yeah, you can. Absolutely. Yeah. So the intended use can iterate until you're ready to take it to market. Really, it can iterate right up until you submit. I mean, we don't like to admit that, but the truth is, it can iterate right until you put it in the submission and send it in. After that, that's when it's solid.
It seems like the FDA dissuades you from tweaking your results. Say like your intended use, your target goals were this, and you weren't able to meet that. You just tweaked your intended use. They don't want that.
Yeah, so they want to see good design principles. So you start with your user needs, and you move to requirements, and then you test to meet those requirements. If you fail, could you go back and change your requirements? You can, but then you got to retest, right? And they want to see the final test results where it shows I met all of my requirements.
Questions? Can I just add something to that?
Yes, please.
So just talking about whether intended use can change. The other time it can change is FDA can come back and say, we are not going to approve for that intended use, but based on what we've seen in your data, if you narrow it down to this, will give you the approval. So sometimes they will come back to you and tell you, no, you don't really have enough to support that. So maybe there's 2 parts you intend to use. It's like you don't have enough to support part 2, but we'll give you part 1. So sometimes it can change by the regulator.
Other questions?
Hi. Yeah, just got a question about HDEs and software. So I guess going through that route, how's that going to flow?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm trying to think if I've
Define
seen
that first word.
Oh yeah. Oh, humanitarian
humanitarian use.
device exemption is an HDE. So that's for where there are. It's a very narrow use, often an emergency use, or a very limited population that might use that device. And so with each one, you have to keep very good records, and you have to make sure that the request for that device actually meets that use. So I'm not sure I know of an example of a software one yet. That's what we're thinking about that. So I guess you would have to, you'd have to license that software individually for that use, and then be able to track that. That would probably be the way to do it. And then if it was the type of software that was limited to one patient, you'd have to have a way of that software turning off or de-installing that software.
So it can't be used for non.
Right, so it couldn't be used for something else. Yes. Yeah, that would be probably how you'd have to do it. Kind of like, think of it like what you'd do for a clinical study with software. You have to say how you're going to return their system back to the original state it was before you installed that software. You'd have to do the same for the HDE after it was used for that intended use one time, or if it was a multi-use over a course of treatment after that patient, it would have to be removed.
Because there are marketing implications. You can't sell to make a profit, right? And that's why they're keeping track of the numbers, because it can be part of your strategy. You can get those initial sales and recoup some of your R&D, but it can't be used so much that you start to make profit.
Yeah, so I was going to say there's the financial implications, and you also still have to prove safety and stuff like that as well. So there's still some documentation that you would have to consider, and that quality system element as well. And yeah, I also am not aware of any software that's been used that's been given the HDE designation, but I also can't say I've looked. So
it's bound to happen.
Yeah.
Other questions? So say you do your homework, right? You look in the database, the 510 database, and you don't see one predicate, or for those of you who don't know predicate, something that looks just like your product. Maybe you see 2. It's kind of a combination of A and B. It's either A or B, but if you put them together, is that a strategy that works?
You want this one?
Sure. So you're going to want to pick one predicate, and you can leverage technology from what's called a reference device. So you're going to want to use whichever device has the closest intended use as your primary predicate. And then if you need a piece of technology from a different device, you can pull that in as a reference device. The FDA does not like multiple predicates. They got a lot of slack for companies smashing together devices and kind of making Frankenstein devices and saying it's the same as these 2 or 3 other devices. And then they got some slack for that, and they reacted to that slack. So, anything else?
So the pathway for that particular product would likely be submitting a de novo, or
honestly, I would try. I mean, you would just submit a Q-Sub and have a conversation with the FDA about this. But I would propose. I would do a single predicate. Pick one that's closest, and then whatever you're adding in, I would do the reference predicate. You can try that. Mm-hmm. You can also talk to FDA about that and find out if they're going to be okay with that strategy. The Q-Sub does take about 4 months, though, so just be ready for that time. Build that timeline into your process. But
talk more about talking with the FDA, right?
Yeah.
So we've got this prototype. We really like it. We've got some data. We might want to start a company, and kind of don't know which classification route we go. Can we go to the FDA and say, let's have a meeting, and you tell us which pathway we should take?
Not really.
No, actually, there's a guidance on pre-submission meetings, and they specifically exclude classification meetings from the Q-Sub meetings. But you can have other conversations with the FDA. That again, the 513G is a good pathway that you can use to determine the classification of your device, and you can use a Q-Sub for many other things. So the Q-Sub pathway, a pre-submission meeting with the FDA, there's multiple different kinds of Q-Subs. There's pre-submission, there's submission issue, so if they ask a question and you need clarification, stuff like that during your submission process. For the purposes of this conversation, we'll stick with the pre-submission meetings. You can have a pre-submission meeting with the FDA and talk about your validation strategy, your predicate selection.
Yeah.
You can talk about, all kinds of different things. Classification is one thing that's kind of out of scope there. So
If they agree with a predicate. If they agree with a predicate in a pre-sub or give you some indication, then you kind of know you're on the right pathway with the 510K.
So you should be prepared.
Yeah. And a pre-submission, just, the feedback that they give you, they will give you written feedback, and then you can also have a meeting. It's not binding feedback, but they do usually stick with what they've said in that pre-sub meeting.
Have you elicited some questions?
Any
burning questions from the audience?
Do lawyers and attorneys have any role in the FDA approval process, or is this strictly more for the technical experts and regulatory affairs specialists?
No, there are a lot of regulatory lawyers out there, and they get paid a lot more than regulatory people. I like to say that I'm like a fake lawyer because we're looking at the regulations underneath, and they're technically looking at the laws, and they can opine on different opinions. But there's a lot of times where there's a gray area, enforcement discretion, for example, that Tracey brought forward, or some other aspect of your business where you would seek counsel from a regulatory lawyer.
Other questions?
There's also medical device lawyers that are not even on the regulatory side, but we have legal counsel for, FTC claims, stuff like that, business decisions that come up and evaluating the risk of business decisions that you're making, stuff like that. So lawyers have a big part in the medical device space, even if it's not a legal regulatory role. Yeah.
Yeah, the other place that lawyers really get involved is when there's FDA enforcement. So your company's in place and FDA's come in and said you violated some aspect of the regulation of the law. That's when you want your regulatory attorney involved.
Mm-hmm.
All right, in the back, we've got a couple.
Hi, I had a question for Tracey. Tracey, you mentioned clinical decision support system, and I know that there are expert systems out there that actually will use AI to make decisions as though they're in the place of the actual regular clinician. Have any of those been approved by the FDA?
Hi, Mark. So the question is, are there applications out there that make the decision in place of the physician, and have they been approved by the FDA? Yeah, so actually one of my examples up there is pretty close. I think I put that on the slide. There's an algorithm out there that diagnoses autism, actually. So it uses video and survey input that the physician puts in, and it spits out a diagnosis. So while it doesn't necessarily completely take the place of the physician's still involved in the process. That's one example. There's also really cool software that looks at it looks at the eye, and I forget what it's looking for. And it's also an auto diagnosis type of thing. So there's a couple out there, but very few that actually completely take the place of the physician. Do you have an example?
No, it's like free regulatory advice here, though. That's a much more challenging pathway. If you just leave the physician in the loop for a little while, even if that's not your long-term game, that is going to be a much easier path through the FDA and any other regulator in the world.
I've
worked on several different products, usually an interface between drug and food or drug and device and those fuzzy areas. And I've universally had upper management like really nervous about talking to the FDA about Innovate, like nothing. They think it's going to paint a big red target on their back and the company's going to be fine. So do you have any general comments about that? The thing I hear over and over is it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission.
I hear that a lot too. Honestly, I think the more you can build a relationship with the FDA, the more you can build trust with the FDA. I mean, these FDA reviewers, they deal with a lot of companies, but they still only deal with a finite number of companies typically. So the more you can have a relationship with your review staff and build trust with the FDA. I mean, if you have several Q-subs where you've really shown that you know your stuff and you're doing the right things and you're incorporating their feedback, and then you come in with a 510K that does all those things, you're really setting yourself up for success, right? If they know what to expect and then they've given you the feedback and then you incorporate their feedback and do what they told you to do, it goes a lot more smoothly than if you just throw a dart. I mean, it's not totally blind, right? You have some good strategies that you're employing, but you just have a lot, I think, more successful submissions when you engage with the FDA, get their insight and get their advice on what they're going to accept, and it leads to a more. I mean, the worst case scenario is that you talk to the FDA and the FDA is like, "You've got this totally wrong. You need to completely shift what you're doing," and you get that feedback usually before you've executed a protocol. That's just a better time to get it. So there's more pros than cons, in my opinion. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a submission this week, and as of as of Sunday, right? Sunday's October 1st. You have to use the E-Star format for a submission to the FDA. And the E-Star is a fill-in-the-blank PDF form for a submission. And one of the new things that's in there that I think is great is it's got a section for you to put all of your Q submission feedback, all of the interaction you've had, the meeting minutes with the FDA. So whatever reviewer picks it up will have that right at their fingertips to see what early conversations you've had with the FDA, what you told them you were going to do, and now they can look in your submission and see if you did exactly that. So it's all there in one place.
I just add to that too. The other piece of that is time, because everybody wants to have things done quickly. So it's better knowing if you're on the wrong path or knowing if there's something that isn't going to be acceptable before you submit, because once it goes in that submission and then they're coming back with all these other requests, it's going to take you a much longer time to get your product approved.
Also, Q-subs are free. So
submissions are not.
Yeah, submissions are not, and you have to have all your data done. So again, better to get that feedback up front.
Other questions?
I know I already had one, so there's no other. So this has to do with the software as Tracey, you had a slide up here where you showed the Fitbit, and you just referred to it, I think, about diagnosing autism that was considered a device, and presumably because it did not have a physician in the loop to determine that. Is that why? I'm wondering if there's a rule of thumb, because I always thought it was the amount of risk. And I was surprised to see in the middle where you said may or may not be a device, suggesting to exercise if you're going to have diabetes. And I would think there might be more risk in that than diagnosing somebody as having, autism. What is the risk to a misdiagnosis? Not much. You might. But on the other side, if somebody exercises and they shouldn't have or whatever, it changes their blood sugar levels, and they have a reaction to that. To me, that seems more risky. Not surprised. So, is there a rule of thumb for where you cross the line of this is a device?
Yeah, it is about risk in some ways, but actually it all starts in the very beginning with that intended use. So, what is the intended use of the product, and does the intended use meet the definition of a device? That's where you start first. So the example with the Fitbit was where that fell in enforcement discretion, which is a device. So it met the definition of device because it was meant to prevent diabetes. So that was the intended use. It would prompt someone to exercise to prevent diabetes. But its risk is what tells you what the pathway to market is. So in that case, it's low enough risk that FDA says, just follow a quality system, we're gonna leave you alone for now. That one fell under enforcement discretion.
Where does interface for device become software?
Yeah, so where does an interface for a device become software as a medical device? That's the question. There is a great guidance FDA has called multifunction, so multifunction software, or multifunction products, I think it's called. Just Google FDA multifunction guidance. And it talks about the different functions of software within a product, because you can have different algorithms that you stick together to make one device or one product, and which aspects are going to be the device aspects versus the parts that are not. And what does FDA want to know about them in a submission? And that's what that guidance talks to. So often the interface is not device software. It's the output that typically is much more than the interface.
And there's testing.
So you're going to test your whole thing as a system, but the element that provides the output is going to be where you put your device.
So as a follow-up, maybe the four of you could share some of the best places for information. I know a lot of this is publicly available, and certainly FDA.gov is a good start, but that's a huge start, right? And so do you have any tips? Googling some of the key terms is one. Maybe you all have other
I'll
ideas.
hand it down. So I would suggest FDA device advice if you're developing a device, and lots of free education. There are videos and PowerPoints that you can download and use. They also have, every June, they do a free small business webinar. It used to be all day in person, but now it's all online, that you can sit in on these different talks. And it starts out at the basic level, and it goes through what's new and what they're working on. So that's a great resource.
Yeah, that's a good one. Also in FDA you can find guidance documents. You don't have one for everything, but if there's one for your product. International stuff is sometimes harder to find, sometimes easier, because the regulations may not be in English, so there's a lot of things that go towards that. But if you find those regulatory websites, are really helpful. The other thing that's really good is consulting firms that do this will often have free webinars. They will often have databases you can look up to, at least at a high level, find out what you need for different regions.
So in addition to those are good ones. I would say you can also subscribe to updates from the FDA so that you can see when things change. And I was also going to say, so like testing agencies like Intertech and notified bodies like BSI, TUV, all those, they tend to have some good informational sessions. So sometimes it's webinars, sometimes it's articles, things like that you can also get information from as well on standards that may be changing and how testing methods are changing to adapt to those and the new expectations.
I don't have much to add on top of that. Yeah, that's a lot of great resources for you guys to start with.
Start with device advice. Tracey took the easiest one.
I got the microphone.
More questions?
I feel disadvantaged.
Free legal advice. So tell me about the South Central Wisconsin, we'll call it market for consultants. Maybe Robin, you are one of them, but right, it sounds like going to RAPS might be one place. Are there other places we're going to run into you and your colleagues if we're looking to interview a few consultants in the area?
There are some bigger staffing firms and companies that can kind of pull from a pool of consultants. I am on my own. I have a couple people that work with me, so a lot of times people come my way and I have to refer them out because I'm too busy. But Yeah, I think it's wraps, and like I said, the 510K database is another great place to look for consultants that are working in your area. And you don't have to work with somebody, local necessarily, because it's more important that you find somebody that's worked with your technology or something very close to it. LinkedIn, of course, but referrals are always great, right?
I just hire Robin. So a number of the audience are thinking about doing a startup, and one of their goals may be at some point acquisition by a bigger company like Philips or Promega or Olympus. What are some good practices or red flags that you've seen on either side? Maybe you were on the startup side, maybe you were on the acquisition side, that people should know about to either avoid or do things right and look really good in the eyes and the due diligence part.
The biggest thing in the due diligence side is a good quality system. If you can demonstrate that you have good design practices, good verification, good traceability, and if I can walk into that cold and understand it and follow your processes and your documentation, the FDA will also be able to do that, and that's a great green flag.
Yeah, like Robin said, having at least one product that you've gotten through the whole process, even if it's not your end game product, gives another company confidence that you can do it and makes you more attractive to be acquired.
Other questions? One of the things I hear, right, we look in the database for a predicate, we look for something that functions and has the same indications for use that we like, we want to go after. So we say we're just like this other marketed device. But then out to the real world, we want to say, oh my gosh, we're new, we're revolutionary, we're so different, we're better than sliced bread. How do you recommend people think about holding those two thoughts in mind at once?
Yeah, there's always a little bit of structural tension between regulatory and marketing. It's part of the game here. And I think that the first thing you want to do is make sure that it's very clear between regulatory and marketing what exactly your intended use is, how generic or specific it is, and that you understand the implications of the claims that you want to make. The other thing is making sure you have supporting evidence for any claims that you want to make, even if it's not necessarily part of your intended use. If it's just like, oh, we're 30% better than the competition or something like that, that may not be part of your intended use. It may not even be part of your submission, but you want to make sure that you have evidence to substantiate any claims that you're making on the marketing side, and holding marketing to that bar can be challenging sometimes. And marketing, they can say amazing things and they really can make your product sound incredible, but you just want to make sure that it's really consistent with your cleared intended use and what you've told the regulators that you're doing in that market. Anyone else?
One thing I would add to that is just making sure people understand what are your claims, what is a claim, what does that actually mean? Because anything you're putting out there about your product's a claim, and as Tracey said, you're going to have to substantiate that. But I can't even tell you how many times I get an argument about, but that's not a claim. And it's like, well, yeah, it is, because you're saying this about your product, so it becomes a claim. And then the other piece that I see a lot is people don't understand what is promotional material, because everybody thinks promotional material is an ad, but it doesn't have to be an ad. It can be something on your website, it can be a Facebook post, it can be all sorts of things where you're making a claim about your product's promotional material, and oftentimes people don't realise that. So there's an education piece that you need to do to make sure people understand what they're doing and how that information is being used and where it can get you into trouble. You're not trying to rein in people's creativity, but you want to make sure people understand, you can do it this way and that'll all be fine. It might not be the way you wanted to do it, but you can do it. But if you do it that other way, then potentially it's going to be a problem and you're not going to get the information out that you want.
This kind of ties in the last question too. That's another red flag for companies that want to be acquired, is making claims that they can't substantiate, or just wild claims like our product's going to cure cancer when they have nothing to back that up. That's another red flag.
The other thing you want to be careful of with claims is that, there was 3 categories of software and things like that. You want to make sure that you're not making claims that may push a product that's under enforcement discretion into a medical device category by making claims of safety or effectiveness for treatment of a condition. So that's another thing to look out for, is just making sure that the claims that you're making align with the regulatory classification of your device or of your product.
Yeah, because if you do that, then you need the lawyer.
Yeah, then you need the lawyer.
Only after you get the warning letter.
Question for you. Tracey, you mentioned in your commentary on software and machine learning based models that so far there hasn't been anything approved that's continuously learning. It's only lockdown models. Are you aware of anyone that's tried? Do you think it's possible within the current regulatory framework and guidance, or is it totally out of scope?
Yeah, so FDA is getting closer. They put out a guidance on predetermined change control plans. But yeah, was it just June? But it has a lot of maturing still to do, that guidance. And so they're trying to move in that direction. They want to get to the point where they can improve it. I don't think they see the path quite yet either. So I'm sure they're probably working with some companies who want to get that on the market and trying to find the path, but no one has showed us the path through yet. I think of it as, the tall weeds and the machete, and you're trying to find your way through. It's nice to actually be the second company because you can follow that path through.
Other questions?
Can I say something about machine?
Yeah.
Also, I think something that's kind of interesting, a lot of the feedback that we've gotten lately in Q-Subs for some machine learning products is that they want a direct comparison, like a head-to-head comparison. Like, if you have a Fitbit that's gonna, what was your example? ECG, having ECG solutions, or looking for AFib, they want a direct comparison to like another wearable. Or they want, if it's a software product that's evaluating, something on a patient monitor, they want a direct comparison to that patient monitor. So it's interesting the way that FDA is going with this, where the predicate that you choose is becoming very important, because they're kind of pushing people into a direct comparison with your predicate to make sure that your performance is at the same level, and the margins for error, they're really pushing, smaller margins for error on that. So it's been kind of interesting being part of some of those conversations lately. Yeah.
Another follow-up question. So, in that example, so take something, AFib versus sleep apnea as a difference, right? So there's lots of devices out there now, right, that have AFib, right? Probably many of us in this room. Versus sleep apnea, right? You still have to go into a sleep lab, right? And there's some, again, right, like my watch will tell me, right, an estimate of my blood oxygen last night. It'll tell me an estimate of was I sleeping well or not, but it's not going to tell me I should go get a sleep lab. It's not going to tell me, hey, maybe you have sleep apnea. And right, I guess could you talk a little bit about that kind of space, and where do you see the distinction between those two right now?
Yeah, actually, I think there was just a product cleared for sleep apnea, so I think that market has been there. But there was a product it was called Smart Socks, and is that the one you
I'll share that one. We teach the outlet lesson in our innovation program.
Yeah.
Please share, because not everybody in the audience knows this.
Okay, so there was a product where you put these little socks on the baby, and it would, they claimed that it would help prevent SIDS, right? Well, FDA finally got into this company and saw that they did not have the evidence to make that claim. They also were not cleared as a device. They were saying they were a baby monitor, but a baby monitor can't prevent SIDS, right? A baby monitor wakes you up when the baby's crying. Big difference. So they actually took the product off the market as preventing SIDS, and they did kind of what Robin said. They put it back on the market as a baby monitor, while they took the time to actually collect data. And then in the end, they ended up, I think they did get a clearance, didn't they? Or they were heading towards a clearance not for SIDS, because they can't make that claim anymore, but it was for getting a better night's sleep or something like that.
For SEO, are they doing
Sleep.
SEO2, like oxygen levels?
Yeah, I think as of this summer, they were getting close, but hadn't yet gotten there.
Hadn't yet gotten there. Yeah.
I heard Halo came on the market with something similar though, without FDA clearance too.
Sorry. Oh, did they?
I just was talking to somebody about this, that Halo, which is another baby product company, came on the market after with similar claims to what Owlet was doing.
I'm sure there will be a competitor complaint.
So it's an interesting one to track, right? Because they made a lot of bad moves, mistakes, and then they went and tried something and it did or didn't work. And so it's a great sort of case study lesson that's emerging with news every time. And it goes to show you that indications for use, what you say about it, is really important. Because I think early in their development, they tried to back down and say as little as possible in order to get a device on the market. But then their marketing group went crazy and said it did all kinds of things that they had no evidence for.
Yeah, but to your question, that's actually, I mean, that's a strategy, right, to do something like that. But the minute you claim sleep apnea, it lends you back to that conversation about the claims that you're making. And the minute you're making a recommendation or a diagnosis or doing any interpretation or analysis of data, providing a medical advice or a medical output, that pushes you into that medical device space. So you can say you got a bad night's sleep, and you're consistently getting bad night's sleeps, but the minute you say you should go get a sleep study, you're a medical device. But you're not if you're just saying you don't sleep well. So yeah, go ahead.
And maybe you have this in your case study, but their stock dropped instantly. Yeah. And then I was working at Optum at the time. We pulled it immediately from the market. So
yeah. So I do share that, and so I actually for a while worked on Wall Street as an analyst covering healthcare stocks. So, yeah.
So now compare and contrast this in the drug space where physicians can use drugs off-label. What's the culture about medical devices being used off-label, not in the way that their indication for use would suggest?
Well, that happens a lot. So the one thing to bear in mind is that FDA cannot regulate the practice of medicine. So physicians have a huge amount of flexibility in how they do things. It's why they can prescribe drugs off-label. You as a manufacturer can't go tell people to do that. So as a manufacturer, I can't tell you to take my product that's designed for research use and take it into a diagnostic lab and start diagnosing a disease with it. But we do know what happens, and we do know labs are doing it. It gets a little challenging once they start telling you they're doing that. And what support can you give them if they're having problems? Because you can't proactively tell them, take this product and start using it on patients and use it for diagnostic. But then if they call you and they have a problem with it and they're using it off-label, there is a way to answer those questions. But that's what they call it. It's the question is unprompted. You're not prompting them to ask it. They are coming to you separately. And there's ways to do it, but it is a little bit challenging in managing that. But you see it a lot in diagnostics because there isn't something for everything, and a lot of the labs make their own tests by calling together different reagents from different companies. And then you may never have intended it. I mean, one example we have is we do a lot of genetic testing for forensics. So the types of products where you're looking at DNA profiles that we then use in a criminal case to say, like, here's the evidence this person did that. And some of those products we are aware were starting to be used for looking at bone marrow transplants, because if you are looking and monitoring that bone marrow transplant, the DNA profile in the bone marrow will not be that patient's, it will be the DNA profile from the donor of the bone marrow. And then over time, if the patient starts to inject that bone marrow, you start to see their DNA profile coming back. So we are aware that there are some labs who have taken our forensic DNA profile testing kits and are using them for that purpose. So there's a lot of situations where that can happen.
We have time for one or two more questions. Yes.
So I think this answer might vary quite a bit, but do you have any ballpark figures on what it costs to get an FDA approval, depending on the class, or if it's a predicate versus de novo?
Yeah, I mean, you can get the actual fee from the FDA pretty easily. It's around $20,000 now for a 510K. But what I always told people within the company, the price from concept through clearance, ballpark figure, $1 million. That's what I'd say.
You can do it for $1 million?
Mm-hmm. Depends on what it is. 510K.
If you don't have like a huge clinical trial or like
oh, there's a ton of variability.
Yeah.
I imagine working with a regulatory professional can help you hone and spend appropriately.
Yeah, I think that as you go through that process, you can put together something of a project plan and look at, what deliverables are you going to need for your submission, everything like that.
third-party testing
that you may need, clinical testing that you may need. Depending, if you're going anywhere where you need to do translations and things like that too. I mean, there's different things that you may have to hit, but I would have said more than $1 million. But yeah,
Tracey can do it for $1 million.
Yeah, Tracey can do it for $1 million.
I'm doing software. There's nothing tangible.
Yeah, I don't know that. I guess I would have said, on the low end of that, maybe like $5 million. I mean, there have been projects depending on the nature of your device too. If it's a really complicated device, if it's machinery, there's so many variables here. But I know. I mean, we've worked with projects that are upwards of 50 to 80 million to launch a new device.
We could end on an optimistic note. Those class 1.
Those you could probably do
cheap,
for $1 million.
right?
Yeah, the tongue depressor. We should have looked at the tongue depressor that we started with.
Call it a popsicle stick. Call it a popsicle stick, and then
and
it's not a device anymore. Okay, that's my advice.
One last question, anyone? Yes.
Does the FDA presently have any regulations regarding cybersecurity in medical devices?
They do. They just released a guidance.
As of
yesterday on cybersecurity. Yes, and they are very worried about it, and they are enforcing the requirements of those guidance. Even, I guess since they just released it yesterday, they're probably not requiring things above and beyond their guidance anymore. Are they already? Yeah, they're requiring things above and beyond what they have published in their guidance yesterday already. So yeah, I would say I don't go in without a strong cybersecurity evaluation. If you have software and you haven't done pen testing, you're wasting your time. And everything else too. But
so in 2019, I did a submission on an all software device, and my cybersecurity section was 5 paragraphs. And last year, I did a submission on an all software device that was really lower risk. It was still class 2, but there was a lot less risk with the device. And we submitted a 125-page cybersecurity report. We got 16 pages of questions back on it, and we resubmitted with a 270-page cybersecurity report. So the bar has raised drastically.
Can I say something else? And that's the U.S. If you look at Europe, there's more requirements in Europe as well. There's new standards that have been published. Japan just published a new regulation effective April 1st, right? Oh, end of March. Yeah. Japan just published. They recognized a standard for April 1st. Korea has their own set of deliverables. So in addition to what you do, and then China has requirements. So Canada has separate requirements. Yes. So all of these countries seem to be pulling from one another and kind of building on one another. The bar does continue to get higher and higher for cybersecurity, which is good for people, right? It's protecting patient data aggressively so, which is fantastic for people. But the submissions are getting more and more challenging.
I want to thank our panelists, Robin, Tricia, Carol, and Tracey. This is
And they've shared a lot of wisdom, but I think the take-home message is open conversation early and be thinking about what the options are as you begin to develop your idea and device. And think that there might be multiple pathways and multiple strategies, and make sure you're getting that outside feedback, that whoever it was who said you don't just sit in a dark room on your computer and figure it out yourself. So thank you all very much for coming. We will send a PDF of the deck for all those here who attended, as well as contact information for our guests. So once again, we at D2P really appreciate that you've joined us here for Innovate Week. Lots more innovation activities. I want to thank BioForward. I want to thank Isthmus Project. We here at UW-Madison are a community of innovators, and so our goal here is to serve you and connect you to the right resources at the right time. So if we can do that, approach any of us. We will do our best to connect you to the right people. So thank you all very much.